When it comes to storing data on mobile devices, PhoneGap does have an API for doing so, which uses the WebSQL database implementation. Now, the problem with using the WebSQL database implementation is this. Beware, this specification is no longer in active maintenance, and the Web Applications Working Group does not intend to maintain it further. Meaning at some point it's likely to be deprecated and eliminated. So I wouldn't depend on that as a long-term storage solution. HTML5, however, does give us a very, very easy-to-use local storage object with which we can store data inside the web browser's own storage that's not accessible to other domains. So I've created a PhoneGap application here called Storage Demo, and you can see here I've got a little form that gets the name, and here's the input for the name, and the email with a button called Store. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up my script tags. And so when we load, we're going to have to create a reference to the button. So document get element by ID. And the ID of the button is BTN store. We're going to add an event listener to that, listening for the click event. And when we hear the click event, we'll call store data, and we'll set the last attribute to false because it doesn't apply here. So the store data function is where we can actually store the data on the mobile device. This is pretty easy to do. First thing we'll do is let's get the data out of the forms. So let's create a name variable, and we'll get that information from the name input, but we're going to want to use the value, right? And let's actually make sure we prepend that with document so it works. Document.getElement by ID. And now let's get the email address the same way. This time, of course, we're going to get it out of on line 44, this input element. So here we go, email dot value. All right, so we've got both of those. So now we're going to store them using local storage on the device. Now, local storage is an HTML5 option that is fairly well implemented across devices and web browsers. So you can feel pretty comfortable using this and knowing that it's going to work. All right, so we're going to go ahead now and we're going to address the local storage object. So we'll do that like this. Local storage dot, and we're going to use the set item method. Now this allows us to create a key value pair. The first value there, the string in quotes, is the key, and that's how we'll retrieve it later. And we'll also set a key called email, and the second one is the email variable. So we've set name to whatever the user typed in the name element on 45, and we've set email to whatever the user typed into the email input element on line 47. So our data now is actually stored, and we could go ahead and test this. We could test it on a mobile device, or we could test it just locally in one of our browsers. So let's go ahead and test it here in Chrome. Learn to program.tv. We'll click store, and supposedly it's stored. Now, we need a way to load the data, so let's add that to our application. So I'm going to create a load data button, and we'll call it load data here. And all I'll do is display the data in an alert when it loads. This way we know it's stored. Now, by the way, local storage is as permanent as it possibly can be, although, obviously if the device gets erased or something like that, it's not going to be there anymore, or the browser application gets uninstalled. But if you want to store just for the session, you could replace the local storage object with a session storage object. Oops, I see a typo I made up here that I made it consistently, so when you make a typo consistently, everything still works. All right, so we changed that to store data and store data, so that works. Now, let's go ahead and create our listener on the second button, which is called btn load data. So using the same technique here, document get element by ID, there's our button. You could use double or single quotes here. I'm changing these to double quotes so I can be consistent. We're going to add event listener, listening for the click event, and then we're going to call the function that I just created called load data and set that last argument to false. So when that button is clicked, the load data function will run, and this is going to use, again, the local storage method, and instead of set item, we're going to use get item. So let's go ahead and we'll set a local variable again to name, and this time local storage get item name. Now remember, these are local variables, so this only has scope within the load data function. So I don't have to worry about any type of collision since I use the same variable name over. All right, so we're getting both these. Now again, these refer to the keys that we use to store these values. So now we'll alert name plus a space plus an email. So we'll get an alert box up. All right. So if I did everything right here, this should work. I've gone ahead and saved. Let's refresh. Click load data. And there you can see the data I stored before still exists because there's my name and there's my email address. We could create a different one. Bert@sesamestreet.com. Let's store that. Now load the new data, and we get the new data stored here. To take the full HTML5 for Mobile course, click the link in the description below. If you'd like to see another video about HTML5 for mobile, click any link in our menu.